I have been asked to ask some questions of these artists before we go downstairs, and so that's what I'm going to do. And the first question is, what was special about this series of paintings?
To me, personally, what was special was, since I'm not from Ohio, although I've lived here for 25 years, it was getting to see the towns and to see how they are similar and how they're not similar. And so that, for me, that's what was really special. It started with, I'm really a fan of granaries. I grew up on the plains, and the tallest thing around was the granaries. I used to call them the skyscrapers of the plains. And I had been up to Mount Victory, actually with Lisa Craig Morton, and I said, oh gosh, look at that. There's this big square granary up there. I said, I gotta go paint that. So then when we decided we were gonna paint, I said, we're going to Mount Victory.
I'd say what's special for me is that I've been an urban sketcher for a long time, but that's mostly working out of a sketchbook, doing really fast sketching, drawing, painting, whatever. And so this has been to in plein air painting, where you sit and you draw, sketch, paint for about 4 hours. It's different. It's really slowing down and changing the pace. It's kind of a Zen moment for me, and so I've enjoyed learning about a place, because I realized that when I'm working quickly, I don't learn as much. When you sit and stare at a place for 4 hours, you learn something. So that's been special for me.
For me, the thing that's most interesting about this collection, it's personal to me, is I have, so after Ohio State, I went to the University of Illinois at Chicago and studied history of architecture and art. And I was interested in it because the history of architecture and art is actually a study of culture and how culture is manifest through artwork. So to me, being able to go around to these small towns, being from Ohio, I felt I was able to see the differences and the regional characteristics of the architecture around the state. And I am I'm a big Ohio rah-rah advocate. I think we are a very underappreciated state with lots of complexity. And so when we painted in Northwest Ohio, which one of these gentlemen said he's from Northwest Ohio, you know, it's a flat agricultural landscape, and the buildings in the towns are very Spartan. They're just straightforward. And when you paint in southwestern Ohio, which has more of a southern influence in the Cincinnati region, things have a little bit more
There's more
ornate.
There's more ornate, yeah.
You know, more like Italianate and that kind of stuff. And then southeast Ohio, which is Appalachian Plateau, is very it's emblematic of their lack of wealth. And then Northwest Ohio is much more you're like English, like not English, but New Englandish.
Greek Revival.
Yeah, Greek Revival. Federalist.
Yeah.
One of the things that we had some fun with was we painted in a lot of county seats. And we noticed that in southwestern Ohio in particular, there seemed to have been competition amongst these county seats. Who could have the tallest and best tower on their courthouse? And some of them are not such big buildings, but the towers are magnificent.
That one. Springfield.
Springfield.
Yeah.
Well, Springfield is just like a big tall thing anyway, so
Right.
yeah, but yes.
I mean, just to recognize the pattern, first of all, Tim's talking about the landscape. Downstairs in the exhibition, there is actually a map that we created that shows the Ohio topography, and you can sort of see, you know, where the rivers are and how those affect things. And so you can see this manifest in the cities themselves. And we noticed a really cool pattern that when you get to these smaller old towns, first of all, nobody had enough new money to screw it up. So you'll have the institution of government right in the middle, surrounded by the institution of commerce, small stores, streets, etc. And then within about a half a mile or so, you find the agricultural industrial complex, the granary. And those all in a very compressed.
You forgot religion.
Oh yeah, they're in our fair share of churches, you know,
Yeah.
and banks. You know, there's always a. And there's usually, if you want to know how many churches there are, it's not the same numbers of bars, you know. So.
You paid outside, you could see the earth move. I'm really not kidding, and you have to be very thoughtful about the moment you decide to freeze the shadow patterns, because it's gonna change. In 15 minutes, it won't be the same as it was. And when the sun goes over the apex, you're done.
And I've never painted in the studio. I've always been outside. So.
So I grew up in a family where I thought this was normal, but my father took a correspondence course in art, and he began to paint in the winters, and in the spring and summers, he would golf. So growing up, we'd all paint, and we'd put paintings up on the fireplace mantle and critique them. So architecture school was like nothing to me. I'd grown up in a family of critics. But the reason I tell that is that I had always painted in a studio environment. For me, painting plein air was hard to do because I was trying to apply my studio eye to it. And when you actually begin to paint what you see, you have to do it more quickly. You have to be more abstract. You have to make less precise judgment about it. You be less literal about the painting. And as a result, I feel like my work progressed, especially on oil, to be better as we went through it. And then, inspired by Terry and Ruth, I had never watercolored, ever. In fact, I was sort of, so there's a well-known Columbus architect, George Aycock, who's widely known as a prolific watercolor. And for me, that was sort of the medium of the generation of architects before me. Mm-hmm. And we didn't learn those skills. I had KB as my instructor. And
no, I'm not that old.
She was younger than me when still my instructor. Actually, someone said, like, seriously? You said that, no, wait,
No,
Robbie's like, how could she have been your instructor? I'm like, I know, she looks younger than me, shut up. Anyway, we learned how to draw a lot. But the point I was making is that when you begin to apply this information about watercolor, watercolor even made me even be more loose because you can't rework it as much.
I was always inspired by those archetypes of the École des Beaux-Arts, those beautiful, section drawings or perspectives, they applied watercolor so gracefully. I thought, I want to learn how to do that.
Yeah.
Well, and at first I was really tight with it. It was like, it just didn't feel right. So now I just paint with a big fat brush, and go very loose. Tim and I have opposite approaches to that. But
No, I think,
yeah.
I think that my watercolor approach, the crutch originally was my sketching.
Yeah.
So someone was asking me earlier, like, wow, I really enjoy your watercolors because there's these, like, is it black ink? I'm like, yeah, that's what it is. So I apply a technique that I don't think is probably a technique of many artists. I'm applying like an architectural technique and then building it up with washes.
I do the washes, I do the watercolor first, and then if I need to sharpen it up, I go in with a pen, but as sparingly as I possibly can.
yeah.
That's pretty much the way I do it.
Yeah.
I mean, that's a more pure way to watercolor, right? What I'm doing is somewhat sacrilege, but to me, it's me.
Well, yeah, but you have your thing.
When you arrive at these beautiful small towns of Ohio, how do you decide what you're going to paint?
So for me, I'm willing to paint anything and just do anything. So when I arrive, the first thing we do is make sure we know where there's a potty. And during COVID, this was an issue, right?
And coffee.
and where can we get a drink and a snack, and where can we go to the bathroom? So for me, going to the local gas station with Ruth and Terry was sort of an adventure, right? Like,
It's better if
Ruth complaining that the food, it's like, Ruth, it is a gas station in Bucyrus, okay? This is not, we're not gonna get, it's not a 5-star place here, okay? But for me, I think that the choice of what we painted for me changed throughout the process. So originally it was more like I was interested in buildings and I was drawing more, painting more elevations. And then I started painting more the place. So I kind of realized that it was about capturing places, and I think I had to break down my architectural approach because we're very building centric.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think early on I was doing tall, I had an affinity for tall things, so I was sort of aiming for, well, because of where we were, we had a fair number of courthouses, and I've studied, Ohio limestone courthouses, as an architect for some time. They're really beautiful, and I just kind of do that. Of course, sometimes I was just doing it in a sketchbook too, so trying to, at the conclusion, trying to slice those out and get them framed, it was a bit stupid, it's like, so I was like, so now I try to work on standard sizes, but then I still, like Ruth, have an affinity for the tall granaries.
The other thing too is that as architects, I think we're very interested in light.
Yes.
And so, and significant pieces of architecture, because the light actually is so important to helping you tell the story of the place. And sometimes it's more important than the architecture.
We spend about 20 or 30 minutes, right, walking around just to sort of say, where's the sun now, where's it gonna go?
Yeah, that's,
Yeah.
10, 20, 30, maybe 40.
5 minutes.
I like granaries, but I also like alleys. There's some paintings downstairs, we were all in the same place, pretty close together that day. Tim painted a really nice close-up. I painted a view down the alley, and on the right-hand side of my painting is the edge of the courthouse. Terry painted the courthouse.
Yeah.
So I like to paint, I like a view down. So I'll paint a couple of buildings with a view down the alley or the street in between them.
And I originally thought when we started this that we would paint somewhat independently.
nah.
And then as it turned out, we decided we'd always just sort of select a place and paint.
Yeah.
And we found places often where we could have our own view.
Yeah.
But you might see in the show that there are some where we literally did the same view, and that's kind of interesting.
And how have each of you found your paintings to be changed after this experience?
I think my approach has gotten much more, I'd say, loose and forgiving. I mean, which I find more refreshing for myself. You could look at some of the earlier work, just like, and this is just sort of an architect's curse. You see so much detail, you want to draw it all. And so it's very easy to fall in that trap of just doing this stuff. So the retreat for me was I just need to be more impressionist. And so one way to do that was, rather than working with fine pencils and small brushes and stuff like that, I now paint with a great big old number or whatever, Isabe's squirrel mop, that I do about 90% of the painting with that one brush. And so the selection of the tool, narrowing it down, changed what my approach to it. And I think also too, the palette has changed. I've learned to take more freedom with the palette. And so my latest favorite thing is a Daniel Smith color called Moon Glow. It's this lavender color that I use for making shadows on buildings. And it's like, oh yeah, that's the sort of the fun part. It's like, this has evolved, and it's like, no, that's where it goes for me anyway. How about you, Tim?
So I told you about my dad's painting guild at our house. I was told that you had to paint with 7 specific colors That was it.
Aw.
You had to mix everything from those 7 colors. So to me, I would say what I've learned is how to be more loose, how to, and then I have never in my life thought that the technique mattered, but I do think it really matters. Like, and Terry's always been pushing that. Like, he gives me books, and so I think I've like spread out in terms of my color range and the materials I use, but I still only, I'm like Terry, I only use one brush, like, period. Yes?
Tim, what are the 7 colors?
Alizarin crimson, cerulean blue, titanium white, yellow ochre, burnt sienna, raw umber, and cadmium yellow, and cadmium red. Raw umber was not one of them. Ruth threw that in.
Oh, sorry.
Cadmium red, cadmium yellow, alizarin crimson, oh, ultramarine blue.
Yeah, right, I was gonna say.
Yeah, that's it. Those are the colors I was
Yeah,
told you had to use.
Well,
Well, I was gonna say, I mean, depending on what you're doing, I mean, if I'm hiking, like, I'll carry a little bitty palette with 6 colors.
Yeah.
There's a cool and a warm yellow, a cool and a warm blue, and a cool and a warm red. And you can paint the universe with 3 colors, you know,
Yeah,
so.
yeah, you can.
yeah, yeah.
A long time ago, I took a class and we had to only use 4 tubes of paint plus titanium white. So then I thought, well, I'll find out what it's like to travel and paint. So I packed up and I went to London for 2 weeks as well. And I only took those four tubes of paint and titanium white, and I managed to paint for 2 weeks with just those few colors. So then, when I go out with these guys, I can take as many colors as I want. But I still try to use a more limited palette, and I think the thing that I've learned is that I need to practice being loose. And it wasn't towards when I started to go back to doing watercolors that I was able to begin to do that. And the very last painting, I think, finally, of all the hundreds that we painted, I finally got there.
We understand how buildings go together, so when we paint them, I'm thinking about the physical makeup of the wall. You don't see that.
No, I can't do landscape because there's just too much green in it.
Oh, yeah, landscape's
It's
a
like-
little hard.
Besides, you could cheat.
Yeah.
Nobody's gonna go say, that tree's not really like that.
Yeah, but if you're truly looking, I think maybe we should only do landscape for the entire
Oh, no,
spring.
we're not doing
Yeah.
that.
Do you have plans to continue
Oh,
painting together?
absolutely, yeah. Actually, Tim and I came up to the university on, what day was that?
Sunday
Sunday
at
afternoon
50
and painted in
degrees.
the freezing cold. And, yeah, we said, I gotta get out and paint. Getting ready for the show, we had a lot of work to do, so we didn't paint for a while, so we need to paint.
Well, in the wintertime, we were doing some interiors. I
Yeah.
mean, we had a really nice day at the Dayton Art Institute.
Yeah.
But it took an act of Congress and high
Yeah.
security.
And they yelled at us.
And inventory, or
Stop.
everything that goes in.
Don't stand there, stand
You know,
over
I
there.
think it's-
Don't look at that piece.
I think it's easier to paint in the National Gallery of Art in Washington DC than it is in the Dayton Art Museum. I'm not kidding you. I'm not kidding you.
Well,
My favorite is to do the sculpture in either the British Museum or the Victoria and Albert because the models hold their pose so well.
I'm torn. I like the Westcott House a lot. It was really great sitting there in the shade and painting that house.
you know, like's a relative term.
Yeah.
I mean, I think there's like for different reasons on different paintings, and it's not just my paintings. I like Tim's and Ruth's, and it's like I like this one more than that one,
I think
etc.
you're supposed to choose your own.
Right. Well, it's like I'm not, all right. So I always say my favorite painting is the one I'm working on or the one I just finished, and I think in this case, I think it's the one in Fredericktown. Really.
Yeah.
So I think that's such an interesting question about which one is your favorite, because my wife will make fun of me because every time I come home, I say, I did the best painting I've ever
You always say
Yeah,
that.
you always say it. Ruth says the same thing. So, my favorite painting, I want to be a good, fabulous oil painter. I think because my dad was one, and I really want to honor his interest in trying to give us that gift. And so I really love my Utica painting,
think your Utica
and
painting
Ruth thinks
is
it's
what-
really quite
yeah.
good. But I think my favorite painting is the painting I did in Zanesville,
Yeah.
which actually sold. And it's because it captures part of I'm from Appalachia, I'm from New Philadelphia. So I remember going to Zanesville and thinking it was the sophisticated city, and kind of being scared to be there because there were big buildings and such. I mean, when I came to Ohio State, I had never been on an elevator. And I went and lived on the 11th floor at Park Hall, right? Like, I mean, that sounds crazy to a lot of people, but that's what Ohio State means to me. It gave me that. And anyway, the painting of Zanesville gave me that same sense, that one, because I kind of was able to capture the entirety of it. And to me, it's this interesting overview of the brick and the landscape and what I loved about, and I kind of miss about living in the Appalachian foothills. Like Columbus, I love it as a place for the people and the way people think and interact, but it's actually pretty ugly comparatively to the beauty of southeastern Ohio.
It was,
Just saying.
Yes.
I have a question.
Yes.
It seemed to me that there were an awful lot of courthouses and town squares
yeah.
that really appealed to me. Just the charm. And then all of a sudden, I didn't see any more. And I want to see some more.
We were always attracted to that because that is actually still the core. I mean, you can build as many Burger Kings as you want,
Right.
but that is the core because it is the center of government, commerce,
Right.
and
religion.
religion,
Yeah.
Yes.
and academics. It's all there, and each town has its own way of solving that, and we could tell you which ones have done a great job, like Medina, and which ones have not, like Newark. McDonald's on the square. But
Well, also, but
any,
what about what they've done for traffic?
yeah, and a lot of them are
cars
like
and
ruined by traffic. Like Springfield is pretty much ruined by traffic engineering.
One-way traffic.
But anyway, the cultural issues that come with that, I think help inspire you to do better paintings. So I think the reason we haven't done it, quite honestly, I'm gonna blame it a little bit on, we did 2 years and we tried to do all these
Right.
towns.
Right.
We have not run out.
Oh, I know.
There's plenty, but many of them are far flung. So we tried to do what was within an hour and a half.
Mhm.
So, Ashtabula is hard to get to.
I know.
And places up in northwest and south, So I think part of it has just been our lack of time and the other thing too is with the pandemic gone, well, I guess it's not gone, but feeling like it's gone, our lives have changed a little bit. Like Terry is fully retired from the position that he was in, and he's teaching at Oxford, and I'm back engaged in flying off to Puerto Rico or whatever as part of my volunteer leadership initiatives, and we just have more stuff going on. So I think that we have to be a little bit more intentional about what we do next. But I do believe I wish you could see all of the paintings. Like when we put them at Ruth's place, it's really interesting to see.
There were a lot of paintings.
I think I myself have 110 paintings, and there's like stacks and stacks of watercolors. So when you see it as a bigger, collection, it's in some ways more interesting. And I only think like I told Ruth, but I don't know if she agreed, I think it would be great for us, Ohio has incredible college campuses.
Right.
So I think we could paint college campuses for a year.
Oh, yeah.
And I feel like we could do the cities, like we have painted
I
Cincinnati.
wanna do the edges.
Yeah, talk about that.
I wanna do the edges.
Like looking
We-
over to West
We
Virginia.
did Cincinnati, we went way up on the top of, what was that, Mount
Mount
Adams?
Adams.
And we
Mount
painted the view and we,
It's
you know,
fabulous.
the river, and blah, blah. So I wanna go to,
Cleveland.
Cleveland.
But we talked about like
And
going
paint the
to,
edges
like,
and down,
looking across to Wheeling.
yeah,
Going down to Marietta.
and Wheeling
Yeah.
and Marietta and something. I wanna do the, I'm interested in the edges, but I
So
don't know
there
what that
are a
will.
lot of categories.
Yeah,
If you want to put them into categories. I was just so taken by the town squares and the courthouses
Yeah.
because they were so charming.
Yeah, they
well, they
are.
are charming.
I mean, call me a schmaltz, but I loved them.
Well,
And,
just to give you an idea.
Bring your checkbook.
Yeah. So to let you know how much we've driven, I logged my miles, and I'm sure Tim and Ruth who carpool quite a bit. Sometimes Ruth and I drive together, but
Yeah.
there's I alone drove 6,500 miles in the last 2.5 years, just driving around Ohio. And so if you match that, you know, there's 13,000 miles on our cars just to go paint. And that's trying to do it within reason and not going too far to the edges. So it's a big commitment for, well, and sometimes we decide, well, gee, it's gonna be raining on Sunday, let's paint on Saturday or whatever, you know, so
Yeah.
it's like, it's always a mashup where it's like, oh, it's crappy weather all weekend, we'll just can it, you know, so.
I think it's good for us to be reminded what a commitment it is, especially before we go downstairs and see all your lovely paintings, because I think you were very committed to this project.
And one thing that's worth saying too, I tell you the best thing that's come out of this is, for me, is my love for Tim and Ruth. It's like, it's like,
I was gonna say the
we've
same
become
thing.
very,
That
very
is a
close.
good thing to come
Yes.
out of
You
it.
know,
Well-
and sharing, giving, giving, you know, teasing each other all the time, and
And learning from each other.
learning from each other.